We've looked at how to set up basic variables in C++. We've looked at loops, control flow, and then we also looked at functions, and finally arrays. And remember, arrays are aggregate data types, that is, data types that that are composed of other things, simpler things. And in the case of arrays, everything was the same. Structures and classes. Since you've set up classes in Java already, are going to look pretty familiar. So although the lecture notes are set up for people who've basically never seen classes or structures, I think as Java programmers, you'll probably be pretty comfortable with structures. Structures are essentially just simpler versions of classes. Okay, so in this lecture, a set of lecture videos, we're going to look at two things: structures and classes. Classes you're familiar with in Java. We have data members, we have member functions, we have public and private, and actually there's same kinds of things that you got in Java. And then you have getters and setters. They're called accessors and mutator functions. Same kind of thing. And then we'll look at a comparison of structures and classes. So structures are definitely simpler, and so we'll start with structures and then we'll move on to classes. Okay, so after arrays, the second aggregate data type is a struct. How do we set up structures? We use the keyword struct. And so recall that aggregate means grouping things together into one thing. And an array was a simple aggregate in that it was a collection of values of the same type. So you have an array of ints. They're all ints. They can't, some of them be floats or doubles. It's all of the same type. Structures are different in that you collect values of different types, because often you want to have, let's say, some information about a person, which would include name, age, maybe some identification number, things like that. And so those are all different types, but they all represent a person, information about a person. Okay, so that's the idea, and we treat structs as a single item, just like arrays. So a struct is a single thing that is composed of smaller things inside it. Okay, so a big difference from arrays is that you have to define a struct first. And Java programmers, you've set up classes, so that's not going to be a big step for Java programmers who know about classes. Typically, we set up a struct globally. So let's just let's get started with setting up a struct, a simple struct. What you do is you set up a main program, and you say struct, and we'll call it let's see, we'll just call it a simple name X. So the book has very nice descriptive names. I'm going to stick with very simple names, and we'll say we have an int variable X and a double variable Y. So this is just to show you that you can have things of different types inside what looks like a class. And some of you might have noticed that as soon as I typed in struct X and then open curly braces, just like you would with a Java class, and then Eclipse helps us. Eclipse helps us by setting up this close curly brace, and it puts this semicolon. Now this is the thing that will trip you up if you're used to Java. In Java, when we set up a class, we don't need this closing semicolon. And the reason this is here is that you can have a declaration of a struct of this type. Put a struct variable name right there if you want to. Okay, so that's a simple struct. It'll get us started, and then you'll see much more complicated structs and structs with more meaningful names, not just simple names like this. We're doing simple names just because we are interested in the syntax. Not so much, we're not trying to solve a big problem. So for now, we're just using the syntax. How do you declare a variable of type of this struct? You just say x. You can use x. Now this is not the best name, but this is fine. This will work. And you can say x, y. So we're declaring two variables, each of type struct x. So this is the simplest possible struct that you can, well, not the simplest possible. You can have a struct with nothing in it, but that wouldn't be even less useful than this. Okay, so here's a basic struct with two data members, and here are two instances of that struct. Okay, so let's go back to the notes and take a look. Now in the book, they look at much more, I think, more involved names, and they have sort of more meaningful names. For example, here's an account struct with two double precision numbers and an int, and the doubles are balance and interest rate, and so nice, meaningful names. Now we're gonna. So in the book, there's a whole bunch of examples of like this, but in the example that I'm setting up in Eclipse, just for the interest of having everything in one page, I'm going to make everything much more simple names. Okay, so we set up a structure variable in Eclipse, and you can do the same. And here's another example. We set up a struct, and we declare that account is a variable of type struct. So it turns out there's two ways of setting up structs. There's an old C style structs, and then there's also the C++ style structs. So what is the difference? The difference is that in C style structs you say this, struct x. And then there are some other differences too. In C++, so if you find code like this that is a declaration of a variable named lowercase x, which is preceded by struct x, then either you're in a C program or you're looking at C-style use of structs. So since we have C++, we'll just check and make sure this compiles. This should work. Okay, so it does give us warning saying we declared these variables, but we don't actually use them, so that's okay. Alright, so this is just like declaring simple type like int x or in double account, so on. This variable account is now of type, and this is a nice complicated type, cd account v1, whatever that means. And then it contains member values. Each of the struct parts can be accessed using the dot operator, just like in Java. So Java programmers with background in setting up classes, this is not at all confusing. This is, I'm guessing everybody will be comfortable with this. That is using the dot operator to access members. So with structs, it looks a lot like classes, and the way it works is that all structs have data members that are all public. So there is no private, protected, and so on in structs. Okay. So for now, consider that all structs have everything public. Later on, we'll see that actually C++ style structs can have public, private, and so on. It's just that C structs do not have, well, C structs have everything public. Okay, so for now, just think of this as everything being public, and later on, especially when we get to classes, we will use the same old Java stuff with private and protected and so on. Okay, so let's go to Eclipse, and now we can access some data members. So we can say x dot, it's unfortunate, but you can do this. you're accessing the x data member of that x variable is equal to 10. You can say x dot y is equal to, since it's a double, we can give it a double precision number. Okay, this is just showing you the syntax, and I'm going to put all of these on one line. That's perfectly fine. C++ syntax, it's not readable, but it follows the rules of C++. And then you can do a similar thing with y. You can say y dot x is equal to 5, and y dot y is equal to 2.781, something like that. So those are all valid uses of structs. Okay, so if you want to print it out, it would be nice if we could print out an entire struct like this, but unfortunately it's just, let me check it out. I don't think this will work. And let's print out something else. X is X, and let's see what we get. Save it, compile it, and we get error messages. So this won't work. So we have to use x has and then do something like open square bracket and then x dot x and x dot y, print out the two data members of x, and finally close square bracket. Okay, give it a space, compile that, works, then you print it out. I mean, you run the program and it prints out the x data member of x and the y data member, and then you can do the same thing with y. So sorry for using these confusing names. It's just to show you that you can actually do all of this. So you can have, for example, x and y as data members. You can have the same, you can have a variable named x and you can have a variable named y. There's no conflicts. These are all perfectly fine in C++. Now you would not want to use things like this in your program, of course. If you're writing programs, this is pretty cryptic. But we're looking at it here just to see how the syntax works and see what is possible. Okay, so there's a simple struct just to get you started. So try out something like this. Maybe change a few things like add more data members, and then see how to set up variables of this type, that is the struct x, or what a struct you set up. You can also do things like, for example, here's another thing that you can do. You can say x is equal to y. Alright, let's try that. Save it, compile it, no problems. There it compiles, and you run it, and you have set x dot x is equal to y dot x, and x dot y is equal to y dot y by doing this one statement. And if you have 4 or 5 data members, you set them all by doing this one assignment statement. Okay, so that's a simple struct, and we'll do more next.